All right, coming at you live all the way from the lower bottoms of West Oakland. It is Soundwaves. And if you've listened to this show before, you've heard me mention the guests I have on here today numerous times. Even other guests have mentioned this man numerous times. I have walked all over the beautiful city of San Francisco to support this man. Today, the guest is Shahid Buttar, who is running for Congress against Nancy Pelosi.
So good to be with you.
I wish I keep forgetting to download like a clap thing.
There's no need for that. Thank you for bringing me on. I appreciate all your help on the campaign, and I'm stoked to have a chat with you today.
So I first found you, I want to say, has it been 2 years or a year or so ago? You were on, I want to say, Lee Camp show.
Okay, yeah, that was probably 2 years ago.
So about 2 years ago,
mm-hmm.
I remember I saw the show, and if it wasn't that day, it might have been like a day or two afterwards. I saw you walk down the street. You just happened to be walking down the street. And I stopped you and talked to you, and we just ended up chopping it up for hella long. Like walking down the street.
Where were we? I don't remember this. That's crazy.
It was like the Mission.
Okay. Deep. Right on. Serendipity strikes again.
And I was like, hey, man, like I think I saw you on like Democracy Now! Or something. And we just started talking. And then fast forward to the future, there's a mutual friend that we have. And she was asking me, do you know my friend Shahid? He lives out there. she used to live here, and now she lives in SoCal, I believe.
Okay.
And we connected via Twitter.
Okay.
And you invited me out. And I can't remember the brother's name. He was running for public defender in San Francisco.
Are you thinking of Mono?
Yes.
Yeah. Mono
yes.
Rogers? Yeah.
Yes. And you know, between those interactions and then hearing you speak and then also working on the campaign, it's been an amazing journey so far. You know, it's not over yet. But there's another young lady that I interviewed, and she wanted to. I asked her if she had any questions for her. Her name is Yana Ludwig in Wyoming.
Yeah. Yeah, I met her. I think I spoke to either her or someone on her team at the DSA convention in Atlanta back in August.
Yeah, she totally remembers that, and,
okay,
and
right
I put a picture of every episode. And I put the picture of you two. I guess she had met you.
Oh,
take a picture. Cute. So there's a picture of you two as the episode of the one I did with her a few. I think Monday.
That's what's up. Okay.
But she also, like yourself, comes from movements,
mm-hmm.
and it's been interesting to see these people that have come from like serious left movements now feel the need to get into politics, and not even get into it from the local. Like, I'm going to run for city council. I'm going to be an alderman. Like, you guys are going for the throat. Like, nope, I'm going for Congress. I'm running for Senate. What was the switch that flipped in you where you were like, I need to do this?
So there was a moment, this would have been February 2018, and I'm in a room of colleagues. I was working at the time at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Mm-hmm. And there was a proposed reform to surveillance laws on which my colleagues and I and allies at any number of other groups, from the ACLU to my former allies at Muslim Advocates, where I used to work 10 years ago, broad swath, even right-leaning libertarian groups, across the political spectrum, Americans have been very rightfully concerned about this metastasis of government surveillance. And I saw her for the, maybe dozenth time vote to extend the domestic spying powers that the Bush and Cheney administration put in secret. And she's doing this under the criminal administration of Donald Trump, when we shouldn't have any false assurances about supposed rule of law protections or institutional checks and balances, like anything goes and we should take nothing for granted. And I saw her duck into the punch of authoritarianism yet again. And I blurted out in a room, I'll be honest with you, I didn't even mean it. It just came out of my mouth. I said, F this something else. makes me want to quit my job and run against her. And everybody in the room said they'd vote for me like immediately. And I was rattled by that, frankly, because I didn't, hearing that from people I respected, I would remember thinking that night, I'm like, well, if those people would vote for me, there'd probably be others. And I thought about it on reflection, having run nonprofits for the better part of 10 years. I was the executive director of a group called the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, now called Defending Rights and Dissent. And, in that context, I'd learned how to write policy and speak to media, raise money, coach a staff, respond to crises. I knew all the pieces of it. And I've for so long wanted someone to replace Nancy Pelosi. She's been my member in Congress for 20 years. And I've gnashed my teeth for so long in so many moments where she has disappointed this city's voice by showing up for Wall Street's interests first. And it's long been disappointing. It's grown, I think, disqualifying. And in that moment, in the ensuing weeks, there's a few weeks later, she did this stunt where she read letters from DACA, DREAM Act students for 8 hours while selling out immigrants in a negotiation. And the now you see it, now you don't, smoke and mirrors, the disparity between the rhetoric and the reality, I would say, grew so outrageous to me that my sense of frustration at being misrepresented grew to eclipse my sense of political self-preservation, and even like economic self-preservation. I mean, running for office, especially against the Speaker of the House, it's like the most, there's no job security in it. Let's put it that way. Right. So, I did this at some, self-risk. And for me, the thing that compelled me was just seeing how crucial she is in the edifice of corporate rule. If we remove her, I think of her as sort of like the exhaust port on the Death Star. If we take her out of the equation, the opportunity for positive things to happen expands so dramatically because she wields such influence in so many ways to constrain the progressive possibilities in the House and support conservative interests, all while claiming to be progressive. And as someone who's fought at the vanguard of our social movements for 20 years, I just can't stand to be represented by a voice like that, I mean, and seeing that's kind of what it came down to for me. And seeing that I could be helpful increasingly left me thinking like I couldn't not give it a shot.
So thank you for the Star Wars reference. That was actually, I don't know if you know Nora Barrows Friedman. She works at the Electronic Intifada.
Okay.
She was on the show. She was on the show recently too, and we definitely had a whole Star Wars conversation about episode 1 being about taxes and trade agreements, and that's how the empire is built. The empire is
okay.
That's why people don't like episode 1, because you have to lay the foundation of how you build an empire, and you do it by taxes and trade agreements.
Indeed. No, that's real. Well, taxes, trade agreements, and CIA interventions.
Which is what the stormtroopers are.
Indeed, exactly. Yeah, the iron fist of the invisible hand. Right? No doubt. There's an arrow out there. I mean, the Star Wars movies were written as an allegory for the American intervention in the Vietnam War. Lucas has talked about that as, the story of the Jedi and the ragtag resistance to the Empire as the story of Viet Cong resistance to the mechanized invasion of a war machine. And, it's discomforting to think that in the Star Wars movie, the United States was the empire, but that was very much Lucas's vision.
I don't think people really want to believe that. I believe that. I know it to be true. I think the average person is like, what do you mean? Yeah. That's not what Rambo was about.
So as good an example as any other.
It's like, yeah, okay. I got a Michael Parenti video for you if that's the way you feel about it. I did want to ask you. So yesterday I had a leftist economist named Arash Kolahi.
Okay.
That lives in SoCal, and we were talking a little bit about the Heroes and CARES Act. and I saw the latest Heroes Act, and that's when I had reached out to you actually to get you on. I was like, God, I gotta get this guy on.
Right on. Right on.
When I saw that, and I saw the Cobra, it's an extension and a what's the word I'm looking for? Where you get like an extension on Cobra, and they help you. It's like a subsidy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The benefit Pelosi proposed in the Heroes Act to expand Cobra benefits.
I've never met a person in my soon to be 43 years on this planet that has said, "Thank God for my Cobra." Never.
Yeah.
When you saw that, and I know you've had some really good tweets about the Heroes Act and what it's lacking. When you saw that kind of gift to the healthcare industry, what was your first thought when you saw that?
And this is entirely what we would expect. It's very in character for her. I mean, I would say that it can be puzzling to wonder, and I think what you're getting at, it is a legitimate conundrum for political scientists to unravel why in a democracy the people's interests are so poorly represented by our policymakers. And the answer is simply that our policymakers don't actually represent us. They represent capital. Capital selects them. Capital puts them in office, and they serve capital when they're there. And that's the story of Nancy Pelosi's tenure in office. And that's as good an example as any other issue to draw it out. And during the pandemic, I think it's particularly revealing when Democratic leadership is doubling down on for-profit, market-based, ultimately predatory, opportunistic policy paradigm when there's nothing you could fathom more than a contagious pandemic to reveal the shared interests in healthcare and the shared aspect of it. We all have an interest in everybody getting testing, access to treatment, medicine, doctors, and care. And the reason why we all share that is if somebody gets sick, it's a contagious pandemic, y'all. You know what I mean? Like, you can't treat it like an individuated commodity exchange. That's foolish. It's also vicious, but it's stupid too. And, I would like us to not make vicious decisions. I'd like us to make more humane decisions. If we're not humane enough to make those decisions, I would at least like us to make intelligent decisions and not idiotic ones that kill hundreds of thousands of Americans unnecessarily. And that's unfortunately what not just our criminal president, but our bipartisan establishment in Washington is committed to. And that's why I'm here to replace Pelosi.
And another thing I really want people to understand about you, I would say in the vein of Bernie Sanders. And I say that because I think 2016, post 2016, millions of people got politically hip.
No doubt.
Millions of people started reading about Marx. Millions of people started reading about socialism and started just reading about politics in general. A lot of that had to do with Bernie in 2016.
No doubt.
And one thing you can say about Bernie Sanders, his history is he was an activist in his youth.
He remains an activist in the Senate.
Yeah, he talks the talk and definitely walks the walk.
Yep.
And I see you as the same cat.
Wow. That's so humbling to me. Thank you.
Well, no, I mean, let's be real. You help stop the facial recognition in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
You were out protesting. Weren't you out protesting not too long ago for the homeless hotels in San Francisco? Yeah.
I mean, all kinds of social movements. I was really, really active in the movement to stop the war in Iraq 20 years ago. I had the second case in the country advocating the rights of consenting adults to marry a partner of their choice. So the marriage equality struggle is one I'm proud to have been a very early courtroom advocate for. And, to your point, it's really the comparison is super flattering. I'm really humbled by it. And sometimes I'll say that Bernie has 50 years of receipts and I don't have that kind of longevity, but I have 20.
Give it time.
I hope to be. Yeah, exactly. He is my political example that I seek to emulate in more ways than one. I mean, even the fact of running, you kind of alluded to this before, like the idea of activists and organizers mobbing up on Congress, right? And the only thing that gave me the sense of possibility to run for this seat was Bernie's 2016 incredible success in mobilizing a movement of people to transform the political debate, right? I mean, Medicare for All, we're talking about it now as the center of bipartisan consensus, even if it's not supported by either of the presidential nominees. A majority of Democrats and Republicans favor universal health care. No one was even talking about it before Bernie in 2016. And then I see, him inspire a wave of people. I ran in 2018 in the same cycle as Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and I got as many votes in our primaries here as she did there. And I saw her win her race. I need to come back in this cycle to finish the job. But if Bernie 2016 was the jab and AOC was the cross, like, I'm throwing the uppercut. And if we land it, we can knock out the bipartisan consensus on corporate rule. We can change the paradigm in this race. And I particularly ran because I see in Pelosi all the marbles. If we manage to knock her out, the signal it will send, if the leading corporate Democrat can't hold on to her seat against a challenge from the new left. And, I happen to, because of the work I've done over the last 20 years, I have established a body of expertise. I know how to talk to media, and I know how to inspire folks. And it's all about like demonstrating a commitment to them, to us, with a capital U. And that's all I've ever done. That's what I'm here for, and I see the incredible momentum that's emerged around our campaign, not just in the primary. I have the remarkable privilege of being the first Democrat to ever face Pelosi in a general election. And, with the support of the now 20,000 donors and about 5,000 volunteers and 30,000 voters from 2 months ago and the 150,000 we hope to get in November, I am very eager to make November her last election.
I'm very eager to make November last election, right, and there's a ton of people. I don't just talk about you to the Bay Area homies. I definitely talk about you to the homies across the country, and I know for a fact several friends have thrown some donations your way because they believe in what you're doing.
Thank you, man. That means a lot to me.
And so I've
That's
also
what we're doing, just to be clear. It's, it's not me, it's we.
I appreciate that. And there's a ton of other people that appreciate it too, because we do feel like a movement. I definitely have ran into cats that I canvass with, and it's always a good feeling when I see them in the streets.
Right on.
You met my brother actually a while back when we were still walking around before the lockdown. He manages Monk's Kettle, which is around the corner.
Oh, yeah, in the Mission. That's a great spot.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what's up. Okay, funny.
Right. What was I going to say? So I've been trying to follow your live streams. I'll put a link to that in the show. The live streams that you do, because I do work. And I saw one that you did with the gentleman, I believe he's from San Francisco, and it was about police brutality.
Are you talking about Marcus Farrell?
Yes.
Yeah, he's actually from Georgia.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. But yeah, that was the issue. We were talking about state violence and police violence, and it was in the wake of Ahmaud Arbery's unfortunate murder. So,
to that point, there's a series on Netflix that I've definitely fallen down a rabbit hole. It's a short series called Trial by Media.
Okay.
And one of the cases that they have that kind of reminded me of Ahmaud Arbery, and I wanted to get your take on this, was, and this is, we were children when this happened. It was like 1984 in New York, the Bernard Goetz, the subway shooter.
Okay.
He shot 4 black kids on a subway because he thought they were going to rob him.
Mm.
And in his police confession, because he turned himself in, like, I want to say a couple weeks after the shooting, he went off on the most racist tirade of why he did it. You would think he gets convicted. As usual, the kids get put on trial. The victims, who are the children that get shot, not him. And he walks away free. A civil trial happened like 10 years later. He actually lost the civil trial, but they never collected a dime from him because he filed bankruptcy. Fast forward a couple years later, after the original subway shooting, you get the Central Park 5. And then you can fast forward a little bit more and you get Trayvon Martin, and now we have Ahmaud Arbery. And these aren't police shootings. These are civilians that feel the need to shoot Black children because they feel threatened. And the conversation seems like it becomes like, for the Ahmaud Arbery case, well, he was stealing something.
God,
it's like,
infuriates me. It infuriates me. It's so preposterous, right?
And then, and then I kind of juxtapose that to the Bernard Goetz subway shooter case, where he admits after he shoots the kids, there's one kid slumped over, and he walks up to him and says, "You look fine here, have another." And he shoots him again, and that kid ended up being paralyzed for life. He didn't kill anybody. They all lived, but one kid was paralyzed for life. How do I guess my question is, when these things happen, and then, you can double down on that with police violence and the Brenda, I can't think of her last name right now, the young lady that got killed by the police in Louisville. And now her boyfriend is on trial for attempted murder because he shot back with a note because the cops had a no-knock warrant. And busted in the wrong house, and it's in a stand your ground state, Louisville, Kentucky is. So of course the boyfriend shoots back. Now he's on trial for attempted murder. Why is it that we don't prosecute these vigilantes that feel the need to take the law into their own hands? I know in Ahmaud Arbery's case, they have arrested some people. But will they actually serve time is the question.
Well, and it took months and a national expose, and it took the particular idiocy of one of the perpetrators thinking that video was going to publicly exonerate them. Which without that act of idiocy, no one would know about this case. That young man would have just died in ignominy, and there would be, the only reason there's been an outcry is because one of the perpetrators was so stupid that he shared the cell phone video. But I mean, and it's literally that bad, right? I mean, we're at the mercy of perpetrators for any modicum of justice here, which is to say, there isn't any justice generally. What you're pressing on is one of the reasons among many, I dare say, that local district attorney races are so critical. At the end of the day, DAs have plenary authority. They're unconstrained. They are the ones who decide who gets prosecuted and who does not. And I think of that as particularly pernicious and important in the context of police violence, because if you don't have liberated and liberatory DAs, police violence is routinely excused. And vigilante violence, I think, somewhat less so, but still, to your point, entirely inadequately addressed. And there have been DAs right here where I live in San Francisco, Chesa Boudin, a liberatory DA. We put in office last fall. The city chose to put in place somebody who's going into office with an attitude towards restoring justice to the criminal justice system. And there are others like him, Wesley Bell in St. Louis, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia. These figures are local actors with immense influence and also with limits. I mean, as we're talking about vigilante violence, and I reflected upon this here in I live in the Upper Haight, and about 2 months ago, there was a shooting. An unhoused, one of my neighbors, about 200 feet from my front door, got shot by an off-duty FBI agent.
Jesus.
So it's like a cross between state violence and vigilante violence, because he was off-duty.
Jesus.
But he works for the federal government, meaning that he's effectively immune from local prosecution. So I went to 3 different community meetings in the ensuing weeks, right? So the first one, and it's an interesting saga just to lay out the differences between them. The first one was convened by a nonprofit here on the block that serves homeless youth. It was really emotionally powerful, sort of a session. The young man thankfully lived. And it was a session among the people who know him well, particularly sharing their own feelings of being unsafe because they're all unhoused. And, I think they all feel like this could just happen to them, right? So it was particularly for the community. The second meeting was included members of the DA's office. Chase has sent a staff member. SFPD was there, member of our board, Socialist Dean Preston, who represents me on the Board of Supervisors, our district, District 5. And, everybody on the panel agreed this is totally unacceptable. Someone needs to be investigating this, and we can't do it because we're local authorities. And what that highlighted for me is the need for federal voices to stand with these visionary local actors. There's one person, arguably three, in this city who could do anything about it. One of them is Kamala Harris. The other one's Dianne Feinstein. Neither of them will because they're U.S. senators. They represent the whole state. But there is a member of Congress who represents San Francisco. She happens to be the Speaker of the House. And Nancy Pelosi hasn't said a word in public about this incident. And there are all these questions. Why is the FBI in the hate in the first place? Is there an investigation happening? Is this person going to bear any consequences? None of these things are public. What is the training going to be adjusted to make sure that off-duty agents aren't running around shooting people randomly? Like there's, all these questions that people legitimately have, and no one's asking them.
Can we train away some of this stuff, though? Is it kind of inherent in society because we do live in such a polarized, racist society? I feel like the things that we're getting on camera footage from police officers, from planting dope on people to the beatings to the shootings, and these are the things that we're catching on their body cameras. I don't think that's happening because they forgot. It's almost like the body camera is a selfie stick.
Oof. That's real. That's real. I mean, I wrote an article in 2015 saying body cameras were not going to fix police violence. If anything, they're problematic for civil rights because they become surveillance vectors and they capture innocuous acts that can be legitimated as pretexts for force escalation. Body cameras are not our friend. Body cameras were yet another corporate ruse to take advantage of social movements. I explained that at the time, and it was frustrating to see so many voices in the movement, rally for them as if they were going to help. At the most, what a body camera could deliver is transparency into an incident. But what we need and what is entirely lacking is transparency into patterns and practices, and moreover, accountability. And transparency doesn't get you accountability. Eric Garner proved us that.
Yes.
Right? You can have a video that tens of millions of people watch, and the only person who goes to prison from it is the person who takes the video. Right? And cops killed him in broad daylight without a charge, without a trial, using an illegal, already deemed illegal force method, the choke. And there's no accountability, which is just to say transparency is not the hole in the bucket. Accountability is the hole in the bucket. That's why the DAs matter so much, because the DA is the decider. Will we bring a case or not? Now, there's a whole other problem, and we've seen DAs in some cities, including Baltimore, who brought charges that juries would not sustain. And that's where the rubber hits the road. Your question, can we train out of it? I don't know if we can train out of it, but the question is, can we get jury pools that will convict police officers and vigilantes for acts of random violence? And I think that's very much a function of the local political culture. Here in San Francisco, hell yeah, we can get a jury to convict a cop who's, if that FBI agent ever had a need to face a jury in San Francisco, yeah, I'm very confident in my neighbors that they would do the right thing. In Oakland, I'm also very confident that they would do the right thing. You put somebody in Alabama, maybe it's a different story. So you need the DA there, and you need a sea change in consciousness such that, the mini legislatures that overrule judges as the fact determiners in criminal trials, that those juries will sustain justice instead of reflect the same patterns of accepted, entrenched, and institutional racism that have driven this unfortunate and unacceptable continuing pattern of racialized violence.
I mean, I definitely think that we had a shot during the Obama years because you have a black man as president. You have Eric Holder as the attorney general.
That's right.
And nothing happened. Trayvon Martin. Who else happened during the Obama years?
Mike Brown.
Mike Brown.
Yeah.
Oh, that was so heartbreaking. Nothing happened.
No, there was the one thing that happened was when Henry Louis Gates got arrested, Obama bought a beer for the cop who did it.
Wow.
Who did not apologize and came to the White House.
Wow.
I mean, it was preposterous. Not only did nothing happen, but and one of the things for me that was really, I have a story from that era that you might appreciate. So this is the fall of 2010. Obama has just come into office. He's been in office now, maybe it was the fall of 2011. I think it was like a year into the administration. And I'd moved back to Washington because it was clear that, there was a whole series here with closing Guantanamo, and he lost a vote in Congress and then ran to the right-wing hills on civil liberties and never came back since. And so I'd sort of noticed this pattern, and he'd been stumping for Bush-era surveillance laws. So I went back to Washington to fight that. And I'm in a meeting with the then chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, John Conyers at the time. And it's particularly a staff who's leading the meeting, and get to a chance to ask questions. And I ask about the End Racial Profiling Act. Now, the End Racial Profiling Act was introduced in Congress in the late 90s. It nearly passed Congress in 2001 with the support of the Bush administration until the 9/11 attacks pushed it off the table. And it's frankly never been seen since. And I asked this question of the leading dean of the Congressional Black Caucus, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, when are you going to reintroduce IRPA, the End Racial Profiling Act? And he said, we are waiting for the administration, the Obama administration's support. And it never came. And this is a president who went to the White House campaigning, among other things, on having passed a racial profiling law in the Illinois legislature. And then he went to the White House with a massive grassroots movement, making massive waves around police violence. And I remember him in 2007 talking in DC. It was the first time I ever heard a presidential candidate acknowledge that change comes from the grassroots. And it makes sense for him to say it. He's a grassroots organizer. He knows. And he said, my effectiveness in Washington is not going to be a function of what I say. It's going to be a function of you and how many of you are rallying around me. And, to that extent, I do very much perceive the Obama administration as a failed opportunity in the policy sphere and for the movement, but also very much for his administration, because we did activate. I was part of Occupy. I was part of the movement for Black Lives. I've shut down a shopping mall in St. Louis, a train station in Washington. I've been on highways with people. We acted, we took action around the country, creative action, direct action, policy advocacy, and I've written articles and I've, been in the streets. We've done all that work. And President Obama turned a deaf ear to us. And I think of that as the central failing of his administration, and similarly with the Occupy movement, there was plenty of cover for him to do the right thing. And his supporters did activate, and he did not show up. He took the easy route. He appointed Joe Biden, a tool of Wall Street, and he ran its administration, to the right. And, if drone strikes and historic levels of deportation and prosecuting journalists as spies weren't bad enough, to see the sustained commitment to Wall Street and to the police industrial complex, even in the face of grassroots mobilization. And let's just be clear here, from a generation of people just trying to survive. It's not like we're asking for much. We're just asking for the people that we pay to keep us safe to not murder us in the street with impunity.
Exactly. I don't know if you know Adolph Reed Jr.
That name does ring a bell, but I can't place it.
He wrote a book called Class Notes,
okay,
I think in the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. He said this about Barack Obama in January of 1996. In Chicago, for instance, we've gotten a foretaste of the new breed of foundation hatch Black communitarian voices. One of them, a smooth Harvard lawyer with an impeccable do-good credentials and a vacuous-to-repressive neoliberal politics. He has won a state Senate seat on a base mainly in the liberal foundation and development worlds. His fundamentally bootstrap line was softened by a patina of the rhetoric of authentic community, talk about meeting in kitchens, small-scale solutions to social problems, and the predictable elevation of process over program. The point where identity politics converges with old-fashioned middle-class reform in favoring form over substance. I suspect that his ilk is the wave of the future in U.S. Black politics, as in Haiti and wherever else the International Monetary Fund has sway. 1996.
Wow, that's a prescient voice. That's a prescient voice. I mean, he's describing. I mean, the only I was going to say Kamala Harris, except that, the do good credentials part starts to break down because she, of course, was a DA, and she was decidedly not like Larry Krasner and Wesley Bell and Chesa Boudin. Like, she was a DA who put people in jail because their kids skipped school. She was a DA who put sex workers at risk and then bragged about it. She is a DA who was, of the predatory variety, and yet still so I fear that the Barack Obama mold of, national black politician was the apex, in the sense that, they've trended more conservative since. And
oh God, yeah.
Right.
Oh God, yeah. Oh goodness, yes. There's something to be said about the black middle to upper class, or the black professional managerial class, the BPMC, if you want to call them that. That's super conservative. And I'll say it in public. I don't care. Super conservative. Karen Hunter has a huge platform. Horribly conservative. And that is like a huge voice in the black community. If you listen to, and there's not many. There's a lot of small people like me that are slightly, larger than me, but there's not a lot of huge voices in the black community that are talking about politics on this level. And most of them that are talking about it from a slightly Obama-esque right of center perspective. Tough on crime, very, very bootstrappy.
I agree with the institutional voices, but it's interesting there because there's a divergence, I think, between black voices that get corporate megaphones and microphones and black voices that don't. And I'm thinking about the Benjamin Dixons of the world.
Oh, I love Ben Dixon.
Right. And I see plenty of black voices that just don't get the microphones and the megaphones that the, Bakari Sellers and the centrists do.
Even Jason Whitlock on the sports tip, he gets a huge microphone. And his sports critique definitely moves into to politics. But I think Brianna Joy Gray has some amazing things to say.
She is amazing. I'm so inspired by her. She's so righteous.
Like I said, there's some, but to your point, they don't get the huge megaphone. It's almost like if you're black and you echo some sort of right wing, almost CNN or Fox talking point, then you got your own show.
Oh, yeah. If you're black and you echo a Fox News talking point, you get a seat on the Supreme Court from Joe Biden. That's what Clarence Thomas
I forgot about that.
I'm just saying, that's the fact, right?
Oh, God.
I wish that weren't true. It pains me that that's true, but that's reality. I appreciate you laughing because that's all we can do at a time like this, looking at a history like that, except for grab the reins and stop it from happening again. That's the other thing we can do. And it is, I appreciate gallows humor. We need it. I just hope to get us out of the gallows, as it were.
So another thing I wanted to ask you about was this, in my opinion, is a time for a Medicare-for-All. If you didn't think we needed it before, for whatever reason, there's no better time than the present. We're in the middle of a pandemic.
No doubt.
There are people that are literally dying because they don't have health care. Literally. It happened in Lancaster a few months ago. A kid got kicked out of an emergency room and died going to another emergency room to get help. What is the plan to move forward on Medicare for All?
The most crucial thing we can do is get Nancy Pelosi out of the House. There's a bill by Pramila Jayapal in Washington. It would extend universal health care without insurance premiums, without copays, without deductibles. People would get the care they need and the medicine they need, and they wouldn't have to worry about how to pay for it. They wouldn't have to worry about going bankrupt. They wouldn't have to fear homelessness just because they got sick. And there are impediments to its passage. The principal one among them is the leader of the corporate Democratic Party. I think beyond that, I mean, that's, I don't want to say self-serving because it's the movement. I think of, again, Pelosi as a crux in that dimension. But, beyond electoral politics, I think other things we can do here in the healthcare arena include, You're making the case, particularly as an emergency measure. If you don't like Medicare for All as a generalized policy, at least recognize the need for it at a moment like this. We've gotten so far in the CARES Act to get to free testing. As the supply chain expands, people can get free testing for COVID, but they still can't get free treatment for it or anything else. And the question I would raise is, it does seem like certainly a no-brainer to say people should get free treatment for COVID. But if they're getting free treatment for COVID, why don't people get free treatment for anything else? And I don't say that as a reason not to get free treatment for COVID. I say it as a reason to give free treatment for everything. And insulin, to me, I think is the most glaring example of the predatory nature of our for-profit system. This is a commodity that takes pennies to manufacture. It is life-saving, and yet the price increases every year. And someone described to me recently, it was revealing to understand the pharmaceutical companies that sell insulin as effectively engaged in a price-fixing cartel, because it takes pennies to make. And the idea that we would rather restrict it, that we would rather put money in the pockets of shareholders and executives than we would keep people alive who need medicine that is easy to provide and cheap to manufacture, is the best word I can come up for that is gross. It is gross and revolting to me, what it indicates about our civilization and our established priorities. And it's why I'm running for office, because I can't look at that and just go about my life. I find that entirely unacceptable. And there is a moment of reckoning. I mean, the pandemic is making the case for universal health care in terms far more irresistible than I or Bernie Sanders or any politician could make.
I will say this, true stories. So I do work in an emergency shelter in Oakland, California. So I do interact with, I think we have over 300 people in the shelter I'm in. And sometimes I just want to know what happened, because I think people look at homelessness as not the end result of austerity politics and neoliberalism. I think they look at it as the end result of bad decisions, bad personal decisions. So to counter that, I often ask people what happened. What happened? And because anyway. So I have one woman that was a home caregiver, like a nurse, and she got cancer herself.
Ooh, okay.
Expensive, loses everything on the street. I have several people that got debilitating illnesses. Young people that got injured so badly they couldn't work. Healthcare premiums high. COBRA's stupid ridiculous when you can't work if you get fired or lose a job. Now you're on the street. These aren't the stereotypical drug addicts. These aren't the stereotypical alcoholics. These are the hardworking Americans.
They are the actual typical unhoused folks. I mean, the leading cause of homelessness is medical bankruptcy. And that reflects a decision. That's a policy choice. We choose to kick sick people into the street instead of saying, we have the resources, you're sick. I mean, we could treat hospitals like the fire department. If there's a fire in your house, you call the fire department. They don't go to the rich person's house. They go where the fire's at. Right? Similarly, like doctors and medicine should go to sick people, not rich people. If you're sick, get the care you need. We have the money. We have plenty of money. And when they tell us that we don't have the money for Medicare for All, frankly, like it takes a lot to make me angry. I'm not an angry person, but like that tends to anger me because the money is there. What we have done is squander it on missiles, on fighter planes, on completely useless instruments of destruction that are used routinely in the service of exacerbating climate change and degrading democracy and human rights around the world. And like, don't tell me we don't have the resources for Medicare when we're spending $2 trillion on a fighter plane. And the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, I probably talked about it in that interview that you talked about with Lee Camp 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Open scandal. Still. I mean, it astounds me that, and I mean, whether it's the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter or the Patriot Act and the surveillance network, apparatus that Speaker Pelosi supports. In all these different arenas, we hear, or take, throw the CIA in there for good measure. We're told that we need these things, these expensive things. And just a brief side note there, we don't even know how much money we waste on the CIA every year. It doesn't report. It's spent. It's a classified bottom line number. And just like, think about that for a minute. That makes particularly no sense. But these things, the CIA, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the NSA spying apparatus, billions and billions of dollars a year, possibly trillions, who knows, particularly because of the CIA black hole in the budget. This money is, we are told, we have to spend it to stay safe. And I don't know if anybody's paying attention, but there happens to be a real national security crisis at the moment. It has three components. You can't fight any of them with a fighter jet or a surveillance network or a military industrial complex or a central intelligence agency. The three national security priorities at the moment include climate chaos, stopping a pandemic, and ensuring that an election happens in November by keeping the post office open. Those are real national security events. Two of them are killing people already. One of them en masse. More Americans have died in the last 2 months than it took us nearly 20 years to kill by sending into a meat grinder in Vietnam. If it took the Pentagon 20 years to kill as many Americans as Donald Trump has in the last 2 months, the outrage is, like, I know people are concerned. We should be rioting. Like, it is bad right now. And when I say that, I mean figuratively, like electorally speaking, we have the opportunity. That's what our campaign basically is. That's what Bernie was. These are expressions of a people that has been pushed too far. And the institutional alternatives don't meet the needs of the moment. We've talked about Joe Biden. We've talked about Pelosi. If we have any hope in seeing real solutions to these very pressing problems, we have to make new decisions. And to get there, we need new people making those decisions. And I'm very grateful for the chance to be one of them.
Oh, man. I think a big problem that we have right now is that the national conversation it's slightly moving to the left, as we said earlier. Healthcare was never, I don't remember a real healthcare conversation, kind of, sort of, in the Obama years with the Obamacare, but not to the level that we're having now. And I definitely vaguely remember it, I think, in Clinton's second term.
Mm-hmm.
But again, not to the level that we're having it now. And the rioting that we're seeing, unfortunately, or the civil unrest that we're seeing, unfortunately, is people fighting to not wear a mask in public and to go back out to quote unquote normalcy. It's really frustrating. It's really, really frustrating. Especially working in an environment where I am working with a very vulnerable population that is fighting to stay well.
I hear that. I mean, it just reveals that our institutions are not built or designed in any way to serve human beings. This is what capitalism means. They're there to serve the accumulation of capital at the expense of human lives and human flourishing. And it's even worth like disaggregating that. It's not just the case that for-profit healthcare and for-profit resource extraction and for-profit weapons kill people. They immiserate people. Even the ones who are lucky to survive. We endure instead of thriving. And, climate chaos is a perfect example of this. I'm lucky enough not to have children, but I have plenty of friends who do. And I have 9 nephews and nieces, and I think about them a lot. And I think about the world, not that they will inherit, but the one they will pass on. And it is quite clear to me that unless we make very, very different choices very soon, we are going to resign the future to increasing degrees of misery and crisis. And I just don't see why we would do that. It's senseless. It's senseless.
It is.
Those are the choices made by a bipartisan establishment in Washington, and we have to throw off its yoke.
And this is why we need to get you in office, so we can definitely push for a real Green New Deal, green new jobs, and start pushing ourselves to alternative energy sources, really pushing ourselves to alternative energy sources. That's why it's important, people.
It is important, and that's a huge part of the future vision too. Is the transition to 100% renewable energy, the federal jobs guarantee to enable a just transition to bring workers along, is a big part of the political strategy to make viable that industrial transformation. And that green new future, it's a dark time that we're living in right at the moment, obviously, and people are struggling with a lot of things. But I look to the future, and if we don't make changes, yes, the future is very grim. But if we make those hard decisions, if we put our resources where they belong, if we do the things we've done in the past and rally around our shared challenges, we've done this before, right? I mean, think about when the Nazis were threatening global peace and human rights in the 1940s. We did show up around the planet. We liberated Europe together. We went to the moon, right? We ended Jim Crow. And we've done seemingly impossible things as a civilization. We can do this. We can save our grandkids from the gaping maw of climate chaos, which is fossil fuel extraction plus military industrial adventurism. We can save Americans from the pandemic, but particularly by ensuring that we restore a supply chain for personal protective equipment, and that we ensure that people can get to a doctor without having to worry about paying for it. We have policy alternatives that can meet the needs of the moment. What we need is the political will. What that means is we need to replace people who stand in the way. And that's why I'm running for office. It's why I'm excited to join the squad and expand it. And I am excited for the future, as grim as it might seem right now. I do particularly think of the Green New Deal and the vision that it has to transform the economy in a way that serves people and serves the future and puts it at the center of our public policy. That is a future worth fighting for. And I'm, again, grateful for all the support from all the people around the country who are fueling our campaign to help make it a reality.
Brother, you got my support. I'm definitely going to put a link to your campaign, because I believe your campaign page has the Act Blue.
Yep, and volunteer link too. I invite anybody anywhere who's down to help out, sign up to volunteer. We do online training sessions every 48 hours. And would love to include any of your listeners. Hundreds of people have gotten trained to this point. We've got hundreds of people on the phone. We're going to grow that program to thousands. And that's a big part of how we're going to liberate this seat.
Is that what the plan is now? Because I know there's no door-to-door anymore.
Right. Yeah. The plan that we put in place in the wake of the primary was an ambitious one that really required a whole bunch of voter contacts. And we sat down, did the math, figured out how many people would need to get on the streets, knock on the doors, and then the pandemic hit. And on the one hand, it presents a challenge, obviously, because calling people is much less effective than connecting with them face to face. On the other hand, it's also presented something of a bright lining in a dark cloud, because the people that are available to knock on doors are only folks in the area, San Francisco, East Bay, some North Bay. We've got a lot of support from the peninsula too, but it's local, right? Whereas anybody anywhere can call on the phone. And, we have phone bankers who are joining us from Texas, from Maine, from Florida, from Washington State, from SoCal, everywhere in between. And that breadth of support is not only very humbling, but it's a force multiplier, and it's giving us reach that we wouldn't have otherwise. And I'm really grateful for all that support.
I'm grateful that you are running for Congress. I'm grateful for the fact that we are pushing to truly make a move to more progressive politics and view things like healthcare as a human right, housing is a human right, military spending doesn't need to be 10 times higher than the next country. The Green New Deal is a must. It's not a dream, it's a must. Much like the New Deal was a must.
Indeed.
The Green New Deal is a must. Surveillance capitalism needs to end. So thank you so much for coming on and spending some time to talk to me. Are you still there?
I am still here. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm grateful to be with you. Thanks for bringing me on. Yeah, it's great to be with you.
All right. Don't hang up. I'm going to play some music, and thank you guys very much. I'll have a link to donate and volunteer to the Shahid Buttar campaign. I'm super stoked to have this gentleman on the show. I'm hoping sometime closer to election time I can get him on. It's going to be hard. I do want to close with this. at the primary, we had there was a primary. What do you call it? Like a after party.
Oh yeah, Zeitgeist.
A Zeitgeist.
Yeah, that was a fun
So
night.
I got off at BART, which is our subway system here in the Bay Area, and I'm walking to Zeitgeist from the 16th Street Mission BART, and I'm passing all the other primary parties. I passed Biden's party, and it's just so highfalutin when you go pass by them. And when I finally got to Zeitgeist, I was like, this is my party. This is the working class.
Right on.
This is the real deal party right here. You had it at one of my favorite spots in the city, Zeitgeist. It was such a good time, man.
We keep it real.
Hella real. Hella real.
Right on.
So don't hang up. Thank you very much.